Professor David Harel, President of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, Professor Nili Cohen, former President of our Academy, Professor Yoshua Yortner, former President of our Academy, Professor Ruth Arnon, she is with us on Zoom, so I'll also mention her, and Professor Menachem Yaari, who will see it later, so I'll mention them, former presidents of the Israel Academy. I think by now I mentioned all the presidents after Yaakov Ziv, and one before him also, Yortner was before him. Professor Uri Sivan, president of the Technion, Professor Andrew Viterbi, UCSD, and his son Ellen, members of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, colleagues and friends, and dear members of the Ziv family, his sons Noam and Atai, his daughters Vered and Michal, and their children, grandchildren of Yaakov and Shoshana. My name is Mordechai Segev, and I'm a member of the Israel Academy. Yaakov Ziv was my colleague at the Technion. We have gathered here today to honor his memory, one of the very best scientists of the state of Israel has ever had, one of the most decorated Israeli researchers. He received the highest awards, and there's no doubt that had there been a Nobel Prize that could cover his field, he would have won that as well. Yaakov Ziv had a huge influence on science and technology in Israel. He was the president of the Israel Academy, co-founder and first head of VATAT, the committee of funding the universities that is supposed to separate the universities from politics, founder of TELEM, which is National Infrastructure Projects, initiator of many projects that helped Israel, not only through university research, but also at the industry. As some of us know very well, Yaakov also had a major impact on Israel's security. He enlisted to the IDF at age 16 and operated a mobile radar. Later was one of the first soldiers in the technology unit of our intelligence force. Later on, he worked at Rafael and had a huge impact, won the Israel Security Prize twice, and was in charge of a team that has made profound contributions to Israel's security. And what is less known, he served on Israel Atomic Energy Commission for many years. But above all, Yaakov was a mensch. Born in Tveria, Tiberias in 1931, to a school teacher that immigrated from Moscow, and a mother that was descendant of the famous Baal Shem Tov, famous rabbi. Yaakov was married to Shoshana, and they had two sons, Noam and Atai, and two daughters, Vered and Michal. Today we are honoring his legacy in the way that he would have liked it most, through the science he pioneered. So before we continue the event, I would like to say that this event was planned together by me and Professor Shlomo Shammai, a former student of Yaakov Ziv. Shlomo had to go to a heart surgery and is not really well. I understand that he's recovering now, so we wish him full recovery. He is deeply regretted he could not be able to lead this event today as our initial plan was. And now I invite Professor David Harel, President of the Israel Academy, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dear Professors Nili Cohen and Yoshua Yortner, former presidents of the Academy who are physically here, Professor Ruth Arnon and Professor Menachem Yaari, both also previous presidents of the Academy who are not here physically. Moti, did you hack my computer? Because almost everything you said is here.
I don't know how to hack computers. I know how to hack people.
Okay. Maybe you did that. So, dear Professor Moti Segev, and I was hoping to say also dear Professor Shlomo Shammai, but we'll just say Refuah Shlema and hope that he should have a speedy and complete recovery. Dear lecturers, a truly amazing lineup, I must say. Dear Academy members, dear members of Professor Yaakov Ziv's family, dear guests, both those here in person as well as those viewing the event from afar. So welcome to this special event in which lovingly and with tremendous admiration we remember Professor Yaakov Ziv, who served as president of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities for 9 years, from 1995 to 2004. I think the only other president who did that was Professor Yortner, also three-year terms. Am I missing something? No. We will no doubt hear a lot today about Yaakov's extraordinary achievements as a scientist and a science leader. Apart from his 3 terms as our president, among the numerous other positions he held, Professor Segev served as vice president of the Technion and as the head of VATAT, which you mentioned also, the Planning and Budgeting Committee of the Council of Higher Education, perhaps the most important task in Israel's higher education scenery. The illustrious group of people who have held that position include other giants, such as, for example, Chaim Harari, whom we shall hear from later today, Manuel Trachtenberg, and the late Amnon Pazi. As Academy President, Professor Segev initiated the founding of TELEM, a broad committee consisting of representatives from government, industry, and academia, and charged with proposing large-scale national infrastructure projects. I think maybe Shimon Ullman will mention that a little later today. As we all know, Yaakov's research was centered around electrical engineering and information theory. This included transformative work on data compression, most notably the ingenious Lempel-Ziv algorithm devised with the late Avraham Lempel, which is still the basis of almost every data processing and data storing application, even as we speak. For his research, Yaakov Segev won many awards. The most prestigious of this was the IEEE Medal of Honor, which he received in 2021, on which, with your permission, I'd like to dwell for a minute. This is perhaps the closest analog to a Nobel Prize for science-based technology, with an emphasis on electrical engineering and computer systems. The award is given to an individual or team of up to 3 who have made exceptional contributions or had extraordinary careers in technology, engineering, and science. This award was first given out in 1917, and it is worth noting some of the most illustrious previous recipients of IEEE's Medal of Honor: Giulio Marconi, Claude Shannon, Jay Forrester, John Tuckey, William Shockley, and Gordon Moore. In fact, if I am not mistaken, Yaakov Segev has received 2 additional awards named after Shannon and I think Marconi. So there you go. You can't do much better than that at all. The one-sentence citation for Yaakov's 2021 IEEE Medal of Honor Award reads as follows: for fundamental contributions to information theory and data compression technology, and for distinguished research leadership. However, and Moti mentioned this too, Yaakov Segev was far from being just a world-renowned, brilliant, and original researcher and a true giant of scientific leadership. He was one of the nicest, most humble people any of us has ever met, the very epitome of a mensch. In short, a rare person of the kind one meets once in a lifetime, if ever. Yaakov also had a delicate sense of humor, which emerged less often than his deep wisdom, his sharpness, and ingenuity. Still, it was definitely present. So here's a small example. As most of you know, Yaakov's sight deteriorated over the last few years of his life. Once, when he still came to the academy for important meetings and events, but already had difficulty seeing, I held his arm while slowly walking him along the corridor over there to our meeting room. Halfway there, I asked him, "So, Yaakov, tell me, how are you really feeling?" He stopped, turned to me and said, "David Hayakar, אני שומע ואשתי רואה, הכל בסדר. Dear David, I hear and my wife sees, everything is fine." Since I started out as president of the academy, he would call me once in a while, gently recommending that I do so-and-so, or that perhaps I should talk to this or that person about so-and-so. By the way, he never gently recommended that I don't do so-and-so. Always original, always making perfect sense, and always backed by razor-sharp reasoning, based on his vast experience and wisdom. For this was not only extremely helpful, but also flattering and humbling. For myself, the highlight of our meetings and discussions was 3 years ago in July of 2022. Since entering the role of Academy President, I've made a point of carrying out lengthy personal meetings with each and every Academy member. Those who are unable to come here to the Academy, say for health reasons, I go to them and meet at their home. Yaakov and I were scheduled to meet at his apartment in Kfar Saba. However, on my way there, Yaakov calls to say that he is sorry, but due to some, I don't even remember, I think there were people visiting, and he couldn't host me in the living room. It wasn't appropriate. So what I did was I said, nevertheless, we meet, and I drove up to the parking lot. His Filipino helper brought him down to the car. We traveled to a coffee shop. We sat for an hour and a half chatting, and I drove him back home. Unsurprisingly, this, for me, turned out to be one of the most enjoyable and educating such meetings, a true privilege and a memory to cherish. And what, ladies and gentlemen, should we say of the present times? I often wonder how Yaakov would have dealt with the current situation. How would you have recommended steering Israeli academia in general and the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities in particular during this terrible and difficult period? We are still confronting complex security challenges and grave international criticism and isolation. Moreover, and closer to our concerns here, we are still witnessing dangerous attempts, both from within and from outside, based on irrelevant and often downright vicious political considerations to damage Israeli science and research. How would Yaakov Ziv have recommended that we confront the rallies and boycotts from abroad? What would he have thought of our government's many attempts, some successful and some not, to gain control of institutions of science and culture, such as the National Library, the Council for Higher Education, and indeed Vatat? How would he have dealt with these? What steps would he have taken to try to minimize them and at the same time maintain the independent, mamlachti nature of the academy? I don't know for sure, but I am certain we could all have learned a great deal from having the answers to these questions. One thing is certain, a central part of Professor Yaakov Ziv's legacy will be this: science has always been and remains a most important bridge between nations and cultures. The wonderful group of people gathered here today to honor his precious memory demonstrate this power of science to connect and unite. And my 10 cents worth of practical advice is that people in positions of relevance should do everything in their power to support science, to voice its great virtues close and far, and indeed its critical relevance to humanity at large, and to fight against every effort to belittle or diminish these. So I like to think that Professor Ziv would totally agree with this. In any case, I already miss him dearly. Chaval al de'avdin ve'la mishtakhin. I would like to thank all those involved in organizing this important event, and especially the dedicated Academy staff. We are looking forward to an exciting evening dedicated to one of Israel's greatest giants of Israeli science. Thank you.